Welcome, everyone, to the premiere episode of The Creative Moment, a podcast where we talk creativity, just kind of how it works into our lives. I am Dante Bullhauer, and this is my
Jamey
dad.
Bullhauer, yep.
And basically, we're just here. We kind of wanted to start a podcast just talking about our creative lives. I am a photographer, videographer, just kind of a digital media guy, and
I primarily write poetry, but I blog a lot. I do have one fiction book, and I have a couple other books in the works. Got some serious word count on them. So, and a teacher, and you got to be creative sometimes to come up with good lesson plans. So,
fair. So with that, we'll crack open our bubblers here. And we'll get started. So this being the premiere episode, let's do a little background intro, kind of how we got to this creative profession, I guess. What led us to become a poet or a photographer. And I'll let you take it away.
Age first. All right. My writing career started probably in fifth grade. I wrote a short story that was kind of eerie. It had an elf who tempted a guy to try to assassinate the world leaders, all in fifth grade. And then started in junior high, actually kind of turned to poetry. Had a poem in the newspaper when I was in seventh grade. But as I joke in the classroom, that's also where I started to write. You know, the joke is bad love poetry, and getting my emotions across. And as I continued through school and college, my senior year, I won an American Writing Award for high schoolers. Published some poems at the Hastings College, the Spectrum, their literary magazine. Then, honestly, for a little while, just worked on being a dad and a husband, and then kind of got back into serious blogging and writing again after kind of, I guess, felt comfortable being a dad and could understand how to handle the time. And lately now, besides my blog and poetry books and stuff, I've ventured into the audio world. I have poetic tracks, and I work crazily with an artist, producer, PR, and he's actually from Australia. So it's just really cool. Right now, I kind of feel a little bit of height of my creativity.
So, Australia, it's like 3 a.m. for him right now or
something?
Pretty. Yeah. So you don't really work very quick respond time.
No, and it's funny how we'll send emails and I'll be like, good morning from Nebraska, and I won't get a response until 12 hours later. But that's where technology actually is really, really kind of cool. He does an outstanding job, makes my voice sound good. Things like that. But it's cool to work in it, like even now getting to talk to you about creativity and stuff. When you start matching and working with people that have kind of the same vibe, it just really does energize you. Yep. It's kind of a cool thing.
Yep. So to give a little background on me, obviously my dad has lived over 2 lifetimes of me. So my background is not as in-depth and involves no bad love poetry. But I kind of started, I guess if you want to go back to the birth of my creative career, was going out into the driveway and taking pictures of me playing basketball. And then putting text on them and emojis and photoshopping the heck out of them so that they would look way too saturated, way too much clarity. But it's where we all start. So
with editing, you should share one.
Okay. Yeah. So this will be on YouTube and just all the places you can find podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So if you're watching this, I'll throw up a quick edit for like 2 seconds. So, But then that kind of grew into, and I've told this story a lot, getting a camera sophomore year for Christmas. It was a simple point-and-shoot camera, but more than just getting the camera for Christmas, it kind of enabled me to explore that creativity and that somewhat of a, not necessarily hobby, but something that I just kind of did into something that I was actually passionate about. And so that was kind of the defining moment for me into turning just something that I did in the driveway, in addition to my actual passion, which was basketball, into what is now my job. So, pardon the trains outside. They are literally right down the street. So, if you hear that, that's what that is. But kind of fast forwarding that throughout high school, my passion just grew more and more and more to the point where I said, I don't need to go to college because photographers do not get hired for their degree. They get hired for portfolio. And so I figured, why go $17,000 a year into debt when I could be in the positives? And I think that made sense for everybody involved. So that's where I am now. Kind of a weird, crazy, fast train to get me to where I am today, but it still feels a little surreal, but I'm kind of now settling into, I know I made the right decision type of thing. So
yeah, and to build on the Dante story a little bit, as a dad who was Christmas shopping for that camera, and trying to, I have already seen like the photos and even though the edits and the cool things, and it was like, okay, we as parents were like, we need to equip him for what was starting to show as more than just an interest. So we spent a lot of time and went to Best Buy and, checked out the cameras there and stuff like that. And then also within just choosing to let him decide what the next chapter is and in his life. And I think part of that, though, is actually what creativity takes, is the courage to actually do something that's a little bit outside the norm. And we just, even with the Christmas gift, we were just like, okay, yeah, this is what we can see in our boy. And it was one of those Christmases, though, as a dad, like when they open a present that you really love, it's cool when that happens as a parent.
Great segue into my last YouTube video about creativity, by the way, if you want to watch that. But so with that, that's kind of our background story, how we got here to this kind of creative world. Now I want to talk about what really is creativity to us. What does it mean? What does it look like? Kind of how that is defined in our eyes.
Yeah, and obviously as a writer and sometimes like that, some of my favorite authors like Stephen King, they actually talk about that. They're like, where do you get this idea? Asked all the time, how did you come up with that? Especially if I share a poem that is a little bit darker or more on the sad side, and they're like, how could you write something like that? Honestly, on my side, the creativity is just rolling exactly with what inspiration is going on for you and the idea that you have. And then, as mentioned before, the courage to actually do it. I had a fellow colleague, she has passed now, but when I worked at ESU 10 and I would come in, I would show some pictures that I stopped and just took. And Gracie was just like, you just do what inspires you. And I'm just like, well, yeah, because that's like no idea, nothing gets done unless it actually gets done. You write it, you shoot it, you produce it, things like that. It never happens. And sadly, I think a lot of people are a lot more creative than they really know that they are, because they let things get in their way of actually sharing those creative ideas and inspirations that they have.
Yeah, so you know this. He was my senior English teacher, for those of you that don't know. But I wrote a paper on creativity. It was our how-to paper, something like that, yeah. And it was just kind of about how to be creative, but in the moral of the paper, I guess, was that creativity was just kind of who you are and just however you express that. And I think I compared it to like how you mix drinks at a soft fountain, like at a fountain drink at a fast food place or something. Like if you mix Powerade and Hi-C or something, that's kind of you showing who you are. And me, creativity is just expressing yourself, because we're all different. We all have different ways we perceive the world. We all have different experiences that have formed how we perceive the world. And so that's how I kind of view my creativity, is just everything that I have seen or heard or been through up until now has given me the ability to express a story or a feeling or some type of thing through the creative media that I display, whether it's video or photo or a graphic or something like that. So that's kind of how I define my creativity, is just it's expressing what I feel inside me and what I want to convey through whatever medium that is.
And there's some that aspect. I was just thinking of Grandpa Susie, okay, and that to connect to, like, I will never be very good at welding. Now, if you remember, Grandpa Susie built that pancake thing for Sebastian.
For the cross country.
He actually built the thing. And he was just like, oh, no big deal. And, you know, he has creativity in a whole different mechanical way and understand. And, like, and then he used it for the volunteer fire banquet and all this stuff. And him with his hands and all that. But I could never do that. Like, I could learn maybe to do that, but it would not go well. But I express my work through words and other things, and I think that's also where people put creativity or the idea, oh, it must be the arts. You know, it has to be music. And no, right? I think certain athletes are very creative in the things that they could do on the basketball court, or, you know, Randy Moss, my favorite NFL player, you know, the way he could catch a ball. And those things are, like you said, are a part of the person. But they still have to be, you know, courageous to go ahead and do that. And that's where I think Grandpa Susie, it's like, oh, you need a pancake flipper for a bunch of cross-country kids? I'll just build it. It's like, yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, so with that, what does the creative process kind of look like for you? What does it mean to basically to have an idea, and then how does that look through, you know, revising it, putting it pen to paper, that type of stuff? What does that creative process look like?
So there's the inspiration, and then there's the final product.
The execution.
Yeah.
Yep.
And in some ways, the beginning part is always messy. I've got Post-it notes. You've seen my desk at school. I've got notebooks all over the house. I actually even just use my phone, because I'll just talk into like a Google Doc or whatever and get the idea down before it leaves. Because a lot of good ideas, I've had a lot of great ideas for poems and they're gone because I don't get them written down, and life just hits you and kind of makes you forget some of those things. Then after that, I listen to music. There's certain songs and certain playlists. They kind of just get me relaxed and calm down my brain. And I edit, and I sometimes get peer editors. Okay, that's for all you students out there writing papers. It's important to get peer editors. Mom reads my stuff. Sometimes students do things like that, because somebody's critical eye can help you eliminate any of those hurdles that a lot of times people will notice first besides the really main thing. They, on that note, like in the very short stories on Twitter, that hashtag, sometimes you can tell I've written that way early, did not edit, and like there's a word, with the spell check on Twitter and everything, just putting in a word for you, and and I didn't see it. And so then the story is just off a little bit because there is an error that everybody wants. So the final product, always try to go through the process that I taught in class. Make a mess, have somebody peer edit the mess, and then you make a final draft.
Yeah.
But so because you, within photography, how do you decide that process? Because that's a whole kind of different medium.
So it's kind of funny how creativity is, yes, it can be critiqued, and obviously with poetry there's grammatical rules that you have to follow. Within photography there are certain technical rules that you have to follow, but part of any good photographer will tell you this, part of being creative is breaking those rules, and somewhat with like your voice in writing. Sometimes grammatically you might change something up, not use a comma, something like that, to explain your voice and give your personality to it. But for photography, a lot of it is, I attribute a lot of my most creative moments to being out in nature. And I love like traveling. I love the outdoors. I took an entire day trip to Colorado and came back the same day, 12 hours of driving for 4 hours of hiking, but that's a whole nother story. But it is just largely me wanting to create something and then going out and just finding, it's kind of weird. I just feel like I see the world through a camera lens, and I'm always looking for how would this look composed this way, or if I moved it down in the frame, moved it up in the frame. And so like everything I look at is kind of like I'm looking at it creatively and how I could creatively morph it into something that would tell a story or give off a feeling, something like that. And I would say probably my biggest strength with creativity is not doing what everybody else does. So like that trip that I took to Colorado, I went hiking around the most famous trail in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. It was like the Bear Lake Trail, and then it goes to like Dream Lake, Emerald Lake, that type of thing. There's so many spots that it literally like is basically begging you to pull out your camera and just snap the photo, and there's tons of people always doing that. So what I do is I look at that spot, go the exact opposite direction of it, and try to find how to make a creative image out of something that nobody else is looking for. And the favorite photo that I've taken from that trip was because I saw these people taking a photo just from this opening, obviously unobliterated view. You just snap a photo and it would be good. So I went all the way down to the water under a tree. I was basically like in the water but on a rock, and I snapped a photo with a tree kind of overhanging the mountain that everyone was looking at, and it kind of just makes the moment that much more grand in the photo instead of just, oh, here's the mountain, it's an open view, snap the photo. And so a lot of my creative process is just figuring out a different way to do things, and something that not a lot of people have done, or something that maybe is just completely outside of the box, and how my own spin on it is how I kind of go through.
Yeah. And that's kind of the mess, because I do know, like in your video about the lighting, especially dealing with that at sporting events, and even, you don't always get an overcast day when you're outside.
Yeah, not every photo that I've done has turned out good by going to where other people don't. Sometimes the spot is the spot because it's a good photo.
Yeah. And so then you take that mess and you tweak with the technology and stuff to edge out certain aspects. And that's the cool part, though, because you still have that courage to do what you kind of, and it is, I will say it's kind of magical. There's just something and everybody who's been inspired has felt this. You've got an idea. You don't always know where it comes from. You don't know and then you go with it, and then that's when you, in a sense, actually see the magic materialize because, yeah, that's exactly what I felt inside.
Yep.
And even if the technical things, like for you changing the contrast and other things, for me, using a poetic form maybe, or making sure that I'm using the right word, stuff like that, and it hits, and you're like, yeah. And that's the rewarding part of creativity.
Yep. Is putting a scratch idea that's in your head and somehow putting it out as a physical, tangible thing that conveys exactly what you were feeling or the idea that you have.
And honestly, even going back to Grandpa Susie, he was so happy that morning to help out. You remember, he was just talking and just in his element, and the pancake thing was rolling. I mean,
it's 200 pancakes just flipping out a minute, and there's 10 cross-country kids at 9 a.m.
I think that's the first time they all just stopped eating, though. There's okay, it's enough pancakes, because he could, almost 20 pancakes.
It was something astronomical for what that was. But, that's the cool part about the creative process is just going through and having something that no one else can describe but you, because it's your idea, and turning it into something that you can share kind of with other people.
Yeah.
But with creativity, obviously, comes ruts, obstacles, things that kind of prevent us where we feel like, this isn't a good idea, I'm not being creative. When you're in a creative rut, when you're struggling with whether it's ideas or executing on them, what helps you get out of that rut and get back to being inspired?
So I was thinking about that as we were setting up and going for today. Really, the rut that I get in now is if I don't get to write, if I don't get to do something, then I just my attitude gets a little bit gray. Is just because I've been doing this so long, it feels like I need to do that. I have to let my thoughts out, get images and stuff that I see kind of poetically out onto paper. And I'm also, in a sense, old enough to be okay if the poem didn't work. It still kind of hurts a little bit, when nobody really responds. It's but I kind of know. It's that's not. But I've gone long enough. I've gotten enough rejection emails and stuff, and to the degree, I'm just okay, it's still there. Still my poem.
Yep.
And sometimes some of those actually get reworked a little bit later. But the rut, honestly, I feel for me is not doing what I like to do, and that affects a little bit, other parts of my life, and so I will whether use a song, and write maybe a golden shovel poem, which means a golden shovel poem is that you take somebody's line and you use that to inspire, just to get back into doing the thing that I like to do most of all, which is write, with that. So
interesting.
You don't always get to have your camera with you, or your other. So how do you, now that you're in the adult world a little bit, and
95%. I don't pay insurance yet, but otherwise, mostly.
Because you're getting a taste of how the adult 9 to 5 sometimes can just be draining. So how are you handling that and getting out of?
Being largely with a large part of my photography has to do with sports. And I've discovered through, I think this is my 3rd or 4th year really heavily photographing or covering sports, that it has become kind of a routine, and I know what shots I'm going to get if I go here, if I go there. I feel like I've taken just about every photo that you can get of something happening in a football game or a basketball game or whatever. Like I have a photo of Kendall Brown, who, if you don't know him, he plays for Baylor. He's declaring for the NBA draft. So I could have an NBA player, a photo of him dunking it, and it's a sweet photo. I might pop that on screen. But, so I feel like I've gotten almost every photo I can get. And so sometimes I feel like that. The reason I took that day trip to Colorado is because I wanted to get re-inspired, because there was a bunch of state events coming up, and I just wanted to not get to the tail end of that and feel completely burnt out and like done with photography. So I feel like getting out of that rut has a lot to do with just changing my environment. Obviously, being up here in this apartment all day, sometimes I can feel just like I need to see something new. I need to be somewhere else so that I can get re-inspired. Maybe this will hit a nerve, this will hit a nerve. A large part of making that last video that I made on my YouTube channel was because I was frankly just kind of burnt out and I didn't know what ideas to do. So I said, okay, let's just go down at night and find all the different like neon signs or lights or whatever and just try and be creative with it. And that rejuvenated me tenfold and it reignited that passion that I know is always there. But when I feel like I've done the same thing over and over again, it kind of fizzles out, and I feel like I need just to hit that refresh button and that get in a new change of scenery to help me rejuvenate that passion.
Yeah, and I can see, because everybody's creativity, whatever it's connected to, like obviously for me being words, like a new song on the radio can inspire, but with yours being that through the lens, as you've mentioned, when your daily routine is the same thing, it's like I don't see anything new,
yeah.
Or how can I actually see this in a different light? And that's kind of just as you were talking, think about one of the reasons we did get your camera for Christmas is because you were using the schools and you couldn't always have it, and we were like, we want you to have something that you can have that's yours. So if you go head off to the park or something, you don't feel like you have to make sure you don't damage it because it's a schools or something, things like that. Yeah. And so that you could see, with your own equipment and be comfortable with it as you grew as a photographer.
Yeah. So that's an interesting something that I've found since I've moved out of being at home is I just got to change up my scenery. And there's my timer. But I just got to change up my scenery and get into a different flow for just a day or an hour or something to help rejuvenate that.
Yeah, and as you grow and get different opportunities, routine. A lot of my writing is done after the girls are in bed,
yep.
And that's it's a little bit quiet. I put my headphones on, and sometimes that's a part, like in your creativity video that you did make, it is just a part of finding the routine in your life that allows you to spark the ideas that you got going. Yeah. And so you do have to schedule that sometimes. I hate to use Stephen King again, but like he's my favorite author. He writes in the morning. He walks afterwards. Like he has a routine. And it's a part of who he is because a part of our routine represents the things that we truly, hopefully really care about and spend our time on. And so if it's day trips to different states every 2 months or something.
I don't know if I can do all that driving, but that's maybe a weekend trip is better. I have a rule of thumb. If I'm going to go somewhere, I better spend at least 3 times the amount of time there as I do getting there. So that was I flipped it. I went 12 hours of driving and 4 hours of doing stuff. But
it is a long story. Don't for another time reason why that happened.
It's a long story. But with that, that's kind of our first episode. We're going to try and do these once every 2 weeks as a 19-year-old and an older than 19-year-old. Schedules get crazy, but we'll try to keep it up as best as we can. And we're also going to try and keep it maybe a little bit shorter. It was around 30 minutes, but it was first episode, intros, stuff like that. So with that, I'm Dante Bullhauer. This was
Jamey Bullhauer.
And we will see you guys on the Creative Moment next time.